What if I told you that one of the most powerful global networks in history was NT built by kings or corporations but by a religious order? A group of priests, bound by vows of obedience and secrecy, quietly controlled trade routes, banking networks, and colonies across 3 continents. Their name the Jesuits. And, for centuries, their influence over money and commerce shaped the modern world. Yet, almost no one knows about it. Today, we'll uncover the hidden history of the Jesuit commercial empire, how a spiritual order became an economic powerhouse, the secrets behind their rise, the forces that eventually broke them, and why echoes of their strategy still influence global finance today. The story begins in the early 16th century, a time of religious upheaval, expanding empires, and exploding global trade. Europe was awash in gold from the Americas, spices from Asia, and a new banking revolution that allowed money to flow across continents faster than ever before. At the same time, the Catholic Church faced existential threats. Protestantism was spreading, and the Counter-Reformation demanded new strategies to maintain influence. It was in this climate that Ignatius of Loyola founded the Society of Jesus the Jesuits in 1540. Their mission, outwardly, was spiritual: education, missionary work, and defending the faith. But behind the veil of devotion, the Jesuits would develop an extraordinary talent for organization, finance, and global logistics. Unlike other religious orders, the Jesuits embraced mobility, education, and secrecy. They studied languages, science, law, and business, not just theology. Each Jesuit was trained to adapt to local cultures, gain trust, and operate networks with meticulous discipline. Essentially, they became the first truly global corporate missionaries. The first clue to their commercial genius lies in South America, particularly in the Jesuit missions of Paraguay. While their peers focused solely on conversion, the Jesuits experimented with economic organization. They established self-sufficient missions known as reducciones, where indigenous communities produced crops, crafts, and even traded surplus goods. These missions became economic hubs, essentially functioning like small, self-contained corporate entities. But it didn't stop there. The Jesuits learned to leverage global markets, trading goods such as yerba mate, sugar, and even silver. By connecting local production to European demand, they created an early form of a vertically integrated supply chain centuries before the Industrial Age. In Europe, Jesuits didn't just rely on donations from the faithful. They became intermediaries between merchants, royalty, and banks. Their knowledge of multiple languages, laws, and cultures allowed them to negotiate deals across continents with unmatched precision. A Jesuit in Lisbon could coordinate with a counterpart in Goa, who in turn arranged shipments to Antwerp, all under a framework of trust and secrecy. Essentially, they were a multinational network operating centuries before multinational corporations existed. The Jesuits' rise to global economic influence reached its peak in Asia. Missionaries in China, India, and Japan were more than preachers. They were diplomats, scientists, and trade advisors. Matteo Ricci, one of the most famous Jesuits, gained unprecedented access to the Chinese imperial court by sharing knowledge of astronomy, cartography, and mathematics. This access wasn't just symbolic, it opened doors to trade networks, financing arrangements, and political influence. By the early 17th century, the Jesuits had embedded themselves into the very fabric of global commerce. They didn't own empires outright, but they controlled critical nodes, ports, production centers, and financial conduits. Their empire was invisible yet pervasive, built on 2 pillars: trust and intelligence. They managed complex accounts, transferred money across continents, and advised kings and merchants alike. In many ways, the Jesuits functioned as a shadow central bank, a global logistics company, and an intelligence network all rolled into one. So how did they maintain control without formal armies or corporate charters? First, secrecy and hierarchical discipline. Jesuits took vows of obedience that allowed information and decisions to flow vertically with minimal leakage. Second, education. Their schools and universities trained members not just in theology, but in commerce, law, and administration. Third, adaptability. They could operate in any cultural or political environment from in the Spanish colonies to Mughal India while respecting local norms. By the 18th century, Jesuit-led ventures were integral to international trade in goods ranging from silver to silk to sugar. Their presence in the Americas alone was responsible for a significant portion of export production, and their financial networks rivaled some of the largest European banking houses. Yet no empire, no matter how invisible, is immune to political storms. By the mid-18th century, the Jesuits' enormous influence began to threaten secular rulers. Kings and merchants grew suspicious. How could a religious order wield so much economic power? Accusations of monopolies, secret banking, and political manipulation began to spread. Eventually, this suspicion would explode into one of history's most dramatic expulsions. In 1773, Pope Clement XIV officially suppressed the Society of Jesus. Jesuits were forced into exile, their missions confiscated, and their commercial networks dismantled almost overnight. But while their formal structures were destroyed, the knowledge, methods, and networks didn't vanish. Many former Jesuits integrated into secular institutions, carrying with them decades of expertise in finance, trade, and global logistics. The strategies they pioneered would resurface in unexpected ways across Europe and the Americas, influencing modern corporations, banking systems, and even multinational supply chains. So far, we've seen how a spiritual order rose from humble beginnings to control a global commercial network, blending faith, commerce, and intelligence in ways that still shock historians today. But the story doesn't end with suppression. The Jesuits' influence left lasting echoes that ripple through modern finance, trade, and geopolitics. In Part 2, we'll explore the fallout of their suppression, failed attempts to rebuild their empire, surprising modern parallels, and the lessons this hidden history offers us about power, money, and influence in today's world. By the mid-18th century, the Jesuits' empire had grown so influential that secular powers could no longer ignore it. Their economic network touched almost every corner of the globe. Silver from the Americas, spices from Asia, intellectual and financial influence in Europe. But with influence came fear. Kings in Portugal, France, and Spain began to perceive the Jesuits not as allies of the crown but as rivals. Accusations of monopolistic practices, hidden political agendas, and secret banking started to circulate. To rulers who prized centralized control, the Jesuits' global network was intolerable. Then, in 1773, Pope Clement XIV, under intense political pressure, issued Dominus Ac Redemptor, formally suppressing the Society of Jesus. Suddenly, decades of financial and commercial organization evaporated overnight. Jesuit missions were seized, their schools closed, and members exiled across Europe and the Americas. The Jesuits were not defeated by armies, but by politics, a reminder that economic power without formal political protection is always vulnerable. The immediate fallout was catastrophic for the Jesuits, for local economies, and for the global trade networks they had built. Indigenous communities in Paraguay and Brazil, dependent on Jesuit missions, were thrown into chaos. Trade routes previously managed with precision collapsed, causing shortages, inflation, and social unrest. European merchants lost key partners in Asia and South America, while banking intermediaries scrambled to fill the vacuum. But perhaps most strikingly, the suppression scattered the Jesuit knowledge network. Former members brought their expertise into secular institutions, banks, universities, and colonial administrations. In subtle ways, the Jesuit approach to finance, logistics, and organizational hierarchy persisted long after their formal empire was gone. In other words, the empire was gone but the methodology survived. Their ideas about trust-based networks, global supply chains, and intelligence-driven commerce quietly seeded the foundations of modern capitalism. Some Jesuits attempted to rebuild elements of their commercial network in exile. In Russia, for instance, they operated schools and facilitated trade under the protective eye of Catherine the Great. In Europe, they advised aristocrats and merchants on colonial ventures and finance. But the scale never returned to its former glory. Political suspicion, nationalistic restrictions, and the rise of secular corporations prevented any full reconstruction. This failure illustrates a key lesson. Even the most sophisticated networks are fragile when they rely on hidden power and lack formal political integration. History is full of invisible empires like this, strategically brilliant, yet structurally vulnerable. So what does the Jesuit Empire teach us about the modern world? Surprisingly, quite a lot. Look at multinational corporations, global banking institutions, or tech conglomerates. The patterns are eerily similar. 1. Centralized knowledge networks distributed across multiple countries. 2. High adaptability to local laws, cultures, and politics. 3. Control of critical nodes in supply chains or financial networks. Consider the top 5 global tech firms. Their market reach, logistics, and influence over governance often mirrors the Jesuits' approach to global commerce, though without the vows of obedience or religious framing. Or consider international banking networks, trust-based relationships, knowledge asymmetry, and secretive coordination remain at the core of global finance. Even the Jesuits' most controversial tactic, leveraging information as power is alive today. From insider knowledge in finance to geopolitical influence via global networks, history often repeats itself in patterns we barely notice. The Jesuit model demonstrates that intelligence, adaptability, and a tightly organized network can outperform brute force, sometimes for centuries. Let's put this into perspective. At their peak, Jesuit missions in South America controlled around 1/3 of the region's cattle herds and half of local agriculture exports. Their trade in sugar, yerba mate, and silver contributed significantly to European markets, sometimes rivaling state-controlled enterprises. Fast forward to today, multinational corporations like Amazon or Alibaba control comparable portions of global e-commerce and logistics. The scale has changed, but the principle remains the same. Concentrated networks with superior information flow can dominate markets and influence governance, even without traditional armies or political titles. From this hidden economic history, we can draw 3 critical lessons. 1. Power is often invisible. Influence doesn't always come from armies or formal authority. Jesuits show that education, networks, and strategic positioning can create empires that leave almost no trace. 2. Knowledge is currency. Access to information, languages, and cultural fluency was more valuable than gold or silver. Those who controlled knowledge controlled trade and influence. 3. Fragility accompanies hidden power. Even the most sophisticated networks can collapse under political pressure or suspicion if they lack formal integration into state systems. This is why modern institutions hedge, lobby, and diversify, lessons first demonstrated by the Jesuits centuries ago. The Jesuit Empire reminds us that the world's most powerful forces are often invisible. Today, networks of finance, data, and global corporations may be operating under similar principles. Understanding these hidden structures is not just academic, it's a matter of predicting economic and political shifts before they happen. If history teaches us anything, it's that knowledge, networks, and adaptability can outlast armies, governments, and even empires. If you found this journey into hidden economic history eye-opening, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. In upcoming videos, we'll uncover more secret networks, untold empires, and the forces shaping the world behind the scenes. Comment below. What modern network do you think resembles the Jesuit model most closely? Let's discuss the hidden powers that govern our world.